You harmed human children? Say goodbye to your entire race. The beacon hit my console at 0314 hours, and every hair on my body stood up before my brain even finished reading the source tag. New Carthage Colony, Emergency Priority 1. No voice attached, just the raw distress signal looping over and over, like a heartbeat that had nothing left to say. I had been commander of the UEF carrier Ironhold for 11 years. I had answered beacons before. I had pulled survivors from burning wreckage, retrieved escape pods spinning through debris fields, dragged colonists from atmospheric failures and equipment disasters. Priority 1 signals were rare, but they were not unknown. This one felt different. I cannot explain how I knew that in the first second. I only know that I did. I was out of my bunk before the second loop finished. I hit the bridge still pulling on my jacket, and my crew knew from the look on my face that there was no time for the usual calm. Lieutenant Cora Webb had already locked our heading. Navigator Owen Parr was calculating the fastest route through the Veth corridor. They had not waited for my order. Good crew. They always were. Distance? I asked. 4.2 light hours at maximum burn, Owen said without turning around. We can be there in under 6 if we skip the deceleration curve. Skip it, I said. What is the colony status? I pulled up the last known data file on New Carthage. It was a mid-sized human settlement, roughly 40,000 people. Mining and agriculture. Mostly. A lot of families. The colony had been growing fast for the past decade. Good soil, good water, low radiation index. The kind of place people went when they wanted a real life instead of a station life. Last automated report was 14 hours ago, Cora said. Everything normal, power stable, no recorded incidents. Then nothing, then the beacon. 14 hours of nothing, I said. Yes, sir. I stood at the center of the bridge and looked at the star map on the main display. New Carthage sat just inside the edge of a region that the Veth hegemony had been pushing claims on for the past 3 years. The Veth were an insectoid empire, old and large and very patient. They did not fight the way humans fought. They applied pressure slowly, economically, diplomatically. They had never made an open military move against a human colony. That was not their style. I had read their style wrong. We burned hard for 6 hours. My crew rotated in shifts, but I did not leave the bridge. I drank 3 cups of cold coffee and stared at the signal, which kept looping the entire time. Nobody spoke more than they had to. The bridge felt like the inside of a held breath. When New Carthage came onto our visual range, I was standing at the forward display. I watched the colony resolve from a warm dot into something that had shapes. Buildings, grid patterns, the infrastructure of a place where people lived, or had lived. I am reading no power signatures in the main settlement grid, Owen said. His voice was very controlled, which told me he was working hard to keep it that way. Partial signals from what looks like an emergency generator block on the eastern side. That is probably what is running the beacon. Life signs? I asked. There was a pause. That pause said more than words could have. Sparse, Cora said. Very sparse. I am reading 1 confirmed biological signature in the central district. Maybe 2 or 3 faint ones further out. The rest of the colony is showing nothing. 40,000 people. Nothing. I gave the order to begin descent, and I went to the equipment bay and put on a field kit. I did not order anyone to stay behind. My senior team suited up alongside me without a word. That was the kind of crew they were. We landed at the edge of the central district because the landing pads were no longer functional. They had been destroyed. Not by accident, not by system failure. They had been destroyed deliberately, with precision, from above. I could see the pattern of it in the way the ground was scorched. Systematic, grid by grid. I stepped out onto the surface of New Carthage, and the smell hit me first. It was the smell of something that had burned and cooled and gone quiet, not the aggressive smell of an active fire. The smell of aftermath, the smells of something that was finished. The buildings were standing, mostly. The Veth had not leveled the colony the way a human military strike might. They had done something more specific than that. They had targeted at select structures. I could see it as we walked. Residential blocks, intact. Agricultural facilities, intact. The mining equipment hangars at the edge of town, untouched. But the schools were gone. There were 3 of them in the central district. All 3 had been reduced to flat scorched foundations. Not collapsed, not burned, dissolved. Whatever the Veth had used on those buildings had turned the material to ash at the molecular level. Nothing remained above ground level. There was also a community center. It had been hosting a children's festival the week prior, according to the last colony report. The decorations were still visible at the entrance, melted and warped but recognizable. The building itself was gone the same way. I stood in front of one of those foundations and I went very still inside. I have been in this fleet a long time. I have seen hard things. I have made hard decisions and lived with them and continued to function. I am not a man who breaks easily, and I do not say that to sound impressive. I say it because what happened to me standing on that foundation was not breaking. It was something different, something quieter and more permanent. It was the feeling of a door closing inside my chest, and the sound it made was final. My officer, Lieutenant Webb, found the survivor. She came over the radio, with a voice that was carefully neutral in the way that only meant she was holding herself together by sheer discipline. Commander Cyan, you need to come to Grid 7. Please come quickly. I walked to Grid 7. The girl was sitting in the hollow of a collapsed outer wall, in a space just large enough for one small child to press herself into and stay hidden. She was 7 years old, maybe 8. Dark hair, cut short. She was holding a datapad against her chest with both arms, the way you hold something you refuse to let go of. The screen was cracked and the casing was melted on one corner. She had clearly picked it up from somewhere, after it had already been through the worst of whatever had happened. She looked at me when I crouched down in front of her. She did not speak. Her eyes were clear and aware and completely exhausted in a way that no child's eyes should be. I did not ask her what had happened. I did not ask her where the others were, or how long she had been there, or whether she was hurt. I could assess the last part myself, and the first 2 parts I already understood well enough from what I had seen. Instead, I just held out my hand, slowly, and I waited. After a long moment, she put her hand in mine. I picked her up and held her against my shoulder, and she did not let go of the datapad. I did not ask her to. We walked back toward the ship, and my crew fell in around us quietly, and nobody said anything, which was the correct thing to do. Back aboard the Ironhold, I handed her to our medic, a steady man named Dr. Calvin Price, who immediately began a quiet and gentle assessment. She was physically unharmed, mild dehydration, shock. He said she might not speak for a while. He said her name, based on a small identification band still on her wrist, was Mira. I went to my office and I sat down. I ran the colony records. I cross-referenced the structural damage pattern with Veth weapons signatures in our military intelligence database. The match came back at 94% probability. The type of directed energy used on those foundations was consistent with Veth military grade, orbital equipment, not pirates, not a rogue faction, military hardware operated with military precision, in a deliberate pattern targeting specific structures. I sat with that information for exactly 4 minutes. Then I opened a communication channel to the Interstellar Compact Council and to UEF Command simultaneously, and I sent a message that I composed in under 30 seconds. Because I had been composing it in my head since the moment I saw the first foundation. It said, "This is Commander Evren Sahin of the UEF carrier Ironhold. I am transmitting from New Carthage Colony, which has been targeted in a deliberate Veth military action. 40,000 colonists are missing or confirmed dead. Surviving forensic evidence indicates the Veth specifically targeted civilian structures housing children. Humanity is hereby withdrawing from all active treaty obligations with the Veth hegemony. Effective the timestamp of this message. Do not ask me to reconsider. I will not." The first response from the Compact Council came back in 11 minutes. It was a request for more information and a call for restraint. I closed the channel and did not respond. I went back to the medical bay and I sat in a chair near Mira's bed. She was asleep by then. She was still holding the datapad. I looked at her face, which was calm the way exhaustion makes things calm. And I thought about the 40,000 people who were not anywhere anymore. I thought about the 3 school foundations. I thought about the way the damage had been laid out in a perfect grid. Not the pattern of rage, but the pattern of policy. The pattern of a decision made in a conference room somewhere, by people in uniforms sitting around a table. I thought about the fact that this had been a choice. Someone had chosen this. I was 3 weeks from retirement. I had already submitted my paperwork. I had a small house waiting for me on the coast of Nova Scotia, where the air was cold, and the mornings were quiet, and I had planned to spend my time learning to fish. I looked at Mira. I withdrew the retirement paperwork at 0611 hours and filed a formal request for Combat Command authorization instead. By 0700, UEF Command had already approved it. They had been watching the same data I was watching. They understood what it meant. They knew me well enough to know that what I had sent was not a statement made in grief. It was a statement made in perfect clarity. The Ironhold set a course away from New Carthage as the sun on the colony's horizon turned the sky a pale and indifferent orange. I stood at the bridge viewport and watched the planet fall behind us. I had answered the beacon. I had found Mira. And now I understood exactly what had to happen next, with a kind of calm certainty that does not feel like anger at all. It feels like arithmetic. Someone had made a decision about human children. Now I was going to make one of my own. The Compact Council sent their first mediator to meet me before the Ironhold even reached UEF space. His name was Delegate Oren Voss, a tall, gray-haired human diplomat who had spent 40 years building relationships across 12 species. He had a reputation for patience and a wardrobe of very sensible suits. He came aboard at a refueling station on the outer edge of the corridor and asked to speak with me immediately. I gave him 20 minutes, which was 12 minutes more than I needed. He sat across from me in the briefing room and opened with the word perspective, which I noted. People use that word when they want to reframe something you have already understood perfectly well. Evren, he said, using my first name in the way that diplomats use first names, as a softening tool. I understand your response to what you found on New Carthage. Everyone does. But the action you have already taken, the message you sent, has triggered a compact-wide emergency session. You have essentially announced a unilateral withdrawal from treaty structures that took decades to build. Without consultation, without a vote, without Delegate Voss, I said. Do you know what the primary target pattern of the Veth strike indicates? He paused. It indicates they targeted civilian infrastructure. It indicates they targeted buildings specifically used by children, I said. Not the power grid, not the communications hub, not the defensive perimeter, the schools, the community center, the places where children were. That was the entire purpose. That was the goal. I want you to say that out loud before we continue this conversation. He was quiet for a moment. Then, to his credit, he said it. They targeted structures used by children. Yes, I said. And I want you to understand that what I did was not emotional. It was a response to documented evidence of a policy-level decision. I have run the weapons signatures. This was authorized at the highest level of the Veth military command. Not a rogue captain, not a regional commander making a bad call. This was policy, which means it was not a mistake that can be apologized away. It was a choice, and choices have consequences. Voss put his hands flat on the table. The compact process exists precisely for moments like this. There are tribunals, there are sanctions. There is a framework. The framework failed 40,000 people, I said. I will not ask for your permission to respond to that. I am informing you of what is going to happen, which is a courtesy I am under no obligation to extend. He left the ship looking older than he had arrived. 3 more delegations came before I reached Earth. I gave each of them a version of the same conversation. None of them changed my thinking, because none of them addressed the actual question, which was not about process or precedent or galactic stability. The actual question was simple, and every mediator who came aboard was sophisticated enough to avoid it, which told me everything I needed to know about where their priorities sat. Earth received me differently. I had expected to walk into a room full of uniforms and be questioned. Instead, when my shuttle touched down at UEF Command Headquarters in Geneva, the building was already in a state of controlled motion that I recognized immediately. Not the motion of deliberation, the motion of implementation. Fleet Admiral Nora Hale met me at the entrance. She was 62 years old, with close-cropped silver hair, and the posture of someone who had been making hard decisions for so long that her spine had simply incorporated them. We had worked together twice before in my career. She did not waste time. The War Council met 6 hours ago, she said, walking beside me down the main corridor. You do not need to argue for authorization. You already have it. What we need from you now is a command structure. I looked at the screens lining the corridor walls, mobilization feeds, shipyard outputs, fleet positioning data. The numbers were large, very large. How much have we already moved? I asked. Enough that the Veth intelligence networks will have detected it by now, she said. We are not hiding this. We want them to see it. What is their response so far? She handed me a data tablet. On it was a translated transcript of a Veth public statement, released 4 hours prior. I read it as we walked. The statement referred to human military mobilization as a disproportionate emotional response to a calculated deterrent action, and expressed confidence that the compact would intervene to prevent what the statement called a destabilizing overreaction by an immature species. I handed the tablet back. They still think we are reacting. They do, Hale said. They believe human anger burns fast and fades. Every model they have of us is based on our diplomatic behavior. They have never seen us do this. Then they have a significant gap in their understanding, I said. She stopped walking and turned to look at me. Evren, the operation they are putting in your hands is not a punitive strike. It is not a show of force. The Council is not interested in making a point. They want the Veth hegemony to cease to exist as a military and governmental entity. The question before you is how far that goes and where the line is. I had thought about that line since the moment I left New Carthage. I had thought about it while Mira slept in the medical bay. I had thought about it through every mediator meeting and every hour of transit and every quiet moment I had managed to steal since. I had an answer, and it was not the easy answer. The easy answer would have been to say all of it. Every world, every ship, every structure, to meet policy with total response. But I kept seeing Mira's face, and I kept thinking about the fact that she was still alive, that she had survived, that somewhere in the Veth hegemony, there were children who had no more say in their government's decisions than she had. The line is the civilian population, I said. We take apart the hegemony. We remove its military and its government down to the last authorized decision maker. We end it as a power structure. We do not touch civilians. Not one. I want that in writing before I accept command. Hale studied me for a moment. Then she nodded. That is what the council wants to hear. I am not saying it for the council, I said. I am saying it because it is correct. The authorization papers were on my desk by the time I reached my assigned quarters. I read every word of them, all 47 pages. I sat at the desk in a plain room with a window that looked out over the Geneva night skyline. The city lights spread out below in quiet rows, and I read about what I was being asked to lead, and I thought about what that meant. Operation Lament. The name had been chosen by someone with a sense of history. I did not change it. I signed the papers at 0230 hours. I set them on the desk and sat back and looked at the ceiling, and the room was very quiet. My communicator pinged once, a message from Dr. Calvin Price aboard the Iron Hold. It read, "Mira is asking where you went. I told her you had gone to make sure something like New Carthage never happened again." She said, "Okay, I thought you would want to know." I read that message 3 times. Then I got up, splashed water on my face, and began composing the operational briefing for my senior command team. Outside my window, Geneva was dark and quiet, and full of people who were sleeping in their beds without knowing how much had changed in the past. 48 hours, I found that I did not resent them for it. They would know eventually. For now, let them sleep. The war planning went quickly. Humans, when they have decided to do something, are not slow. That is a thing other species genuinely do not grasp until they see it. Other civilizations have long consultation processes, committees, multi-stage approvals, philosophical frameworks for deciding when action is justified. Humanity has those things too. But once the decision is made, we shift to a different mode entirely, and the speed of that shift is startling even to people who have seen it before. Within 2 weeks of my authorization signing, we had assembled the largest fleet UEF had ever deployed. Not the most advanced, in terms of experimental technology. Not the most heavily armed, in terms of individual ship power. The most coordinated, the most complete. Every element of it had a role that connected to every other element, like the pieces of a mechanism that had been built for precisely this one function. I reviewed the fleet roster from the bridge of the Iron Hold, which had been formally designated the command vessel for Operation Lament. It was a long list. I knew many of the ship names and many of the commanders behind them. Good people, all of them. People who had answered the same beacon I had answered, in one form or another, throughout their careers. I called my senior staff together for a final briefing the day before we were scheduled to begin the advance toward Veth space. 7 people around a table. 7 people who I trusted with my life and who understood exactly what we were undertaking. I looked at each of them in turn. Lieutenant Cora Webb, who had locked our heading before I even gave the order. Navigator Owen Parr, whose hands had been steady on every course I had ever asked him to plot. My tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Percy Holt, who had a gift for seeing the shape of a battle 3 steps before it arrived. Medical officer Calvin Price, who was present because he understood what was at stake in a way that was different from us. Intelligence officer Faye Drummond, quiet and precise and almost never wrong. Chief Engineer Bart Lowe, who kept the Iron Hold alive through every difficult situation I had ever put her in, and my executive officer Commander Nadia Bell, who had served beside me for 6 years and who I knew was going to push back on something before this briefing was over. You have all read the operational parameters, I said. You know the scope. You know the rules of engagement. I want to hear any concerns before we move, not after. Nadia did not wait long. She leaned forward slightly and said, "The rules of engagement are clear about the civilian population, but command has not given us a defined endpoint. At what point do we consider the objective achieved? When the hegemony government surrenders? When their military command structure is neutralized? When their capacity to conduct offensive operations is gone?" Those are 3 different endpoints, she was right to ask. It was exactly the right question. All 3, I said, in that order. We are not stopping at a surrender statement, because surrender statements can be reversed. We are not stopping when the military command is neutralized, because a government without a military can still rebuild one. We end when all three conditions are met, simultaneously. And if the compact tries to physically intervene, Percy Holt asked. They will, I said. The Therial Collective is already positioning a peacekeeping fleet. They will put themselves between us and Veth space. We are going around them. No confrontation, no engagement, no provocation. We acknowledge their presence, and we change course. They are not our enemy. They are people who do not yet understand what they are looking at. They will call it aggression, Faye Drummond said. They can call it whatever they want, I said. History will decide what to call it. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Bart Lowe, who had not said anything yet, said in his low, steady voice, Commander, you found the girl. Yes, I said. Then we all know why we are doing this, he said. And that was the end of the briefing. The first engagement happened at the Veth Communication Relay Station designated CR7, in the outer ring of their border territory. I had not planned for it to be dramatic. I had planned for it to be efficient. The relay station was staffed by a small technical crew and defended by 2 Veth patrol ships. It was not a major military asset, but it was part of the communications spine that connected the hegemony's command structure across its territory. And without it, a significant portion of their real-time coordination would develop a delay that would compound over days into something serious. My tactical officer Percy Holt presented the strike plan in under 10 minutes. Clean, precise, zero collateral. I approved it. The 2 patrol ships were disabled, not destroyed. I want to be precise about that, because precision matters when you are writing your own account of what you did and why. The station's systems were destroyed completely. The crew was picked up by a support vessel and processed as non-combatants. They were confused. Some were frightened. None were harmed. That was how we operated. It was not gentle, but it was exact. What happened in the next 3 weeks was not a series of dramatic space battles. I want to be honest about that, because the people who tell stories about war often focus on the battles, because battles are vivid and battles have moments that are easy to describe. What we did was different. We took the Veth hegemony apart the way you take apart a machine, not by hitting it as hard as possible in the center, by removing, piece by piece, the components that allowed it to function. We destroyed their long-range sensor networks. We took out the fuel distribution hubs that serviced their deep space fleet. We shut down the quantum communication nodes that their command structure relied on for coordination. We disabled the automated defense grids around their 3 largest military shipyards. We did not destroy the shipyards. We made them blind and uncoordinated, so that when the time came, they would not be able to respond effectively to anything. The Veth fleet came out to meet us 3 times during this phase. 3 separate engagement attempts, each one larger than the last. They had 14 times our total ship count. And for the first engagement, they deployed what they clearly believed was an overwhelming force, a hammer designed to end the campaign in one strike. I watched it coming on the tactical display from the bridge of the Iron Hold, and I felt very calm. Percy, I said. Already plotted, he said. We did not fight the hammer. We moved sideways. The Veth fleet's strategy was based on human battle doctrine from 30 years prior, which was the last time we had been in a significant military engagement. They had studied our tactics from that period. They had prepared for that version of us. What they were seeing in front of them was a different version. We had learned things since then. The Veth hammer hit empty space. Our ships were already positioned on their flanks, in the gaps between their formation elements, where their weapons coordination was weakest. Percy called the strike sequences in a voice as calm as someone reading a grocery list. 6 Veth command ships disabled in under 4 minutes. The rest of their formation, suddenly without coordination, scattered in the way formations scatter when the center gives out. We did not chase them. We let them go and returned to our operational objectives. The second and third engagements went similarly. Each time the Veth came with more ships, more confidence, more certainty that the next approach would be different. Each time, they were fighting the version of humanity they had studied, not the one in front of them. After the third engagement, their fleet movements changed. They pulled back. They stopped coming out to meet us and began consolidating around their core systems, which was exactly what I had anticipated. An enemy that stops advancing and starts protecting its center is an enemy that has begun to think about the future differently. The compact peacekeeping fleet, led by the Therial Collective's Admiral Sarenval, made contact with me on day 18. She was professional, direct, and clearly frustrated. Commander Sahin, she said over the video link, her translator rendering her speech into flat, precise English. We have repositioned our fleet to form a barrier at grid coordinates I am transmitting now. We are asking you to halt your advance and enter mediation. I acknowledge your position, Admiral, I said. I am transmitting our adjusted course now. She looked at the data her navigator was clearly feeding her, and her expression shifted in a way that, even across species barriers, was easy to read. You are going around us. Yes, I said. That is not the response we expected. I know, I said. I am not your enemy, Admiral. I have no quarrel with you or your fleet. I am asking only that you do not place your ships in a position where I would have to treat you as an obstacle. That would not benefit either of us. There was a long pause on her end. What is your objective, Commander? Precisely. The end of the Veth hegemony as a military and governmental entity, I said. The protection of every civilian population in their territory. The accountability of every individual in their command structure who authorized the policy that destroyed New Carthage. Precisely. Another pause. And when that is achieved, we stop, I said. Completely. We have no interest into terror. We have no interest in resources. We want accountability, and we want a guarantee that what happened to New Carthage cannot happen again. She studied me through the screen. Whatever she had expected from me, I could see it was not this. She had likely expected rage that could be managed, anger that could be channeled into acceptable forms. She was encountering something else. She was encountering a plan. I will transmit your position to the Council, she said finally. Please do, I said. And Admiral, while you have their attention, ask them to look up the records of the Keth colony incident from 14 years ago, and the Paula Station disappearance from 9 years ago. Ask them to cross-reference the damage signatures with what you have on file for Veth military-grade equipment. I think the conversation that follows will be useful. She looked at me for a moment longer, then closed the channel. Faye Drummond appeared at my shoulder. She had been standing just outside the frame of the video link, as she always was during communications. She had a talent for being present without being visible. She is going to look it up, Faye said quietly. I know, I said. That is why I mentioned it. The Keth colony incident. The Paula Station disappearance, 2 events that had been logged as accidents, as equipment failures, as the kind of tragedy that happens in the rough outer territories of a young interstellar civilization. 2 events that the relevant species had grieved and moved past and never fully investigated, because investigation was expensive and painful, and the results might have required a response that nobody wanted to commit to. I had found the cross-reference in our intelligence files on day 4. Faye had found it first, actually, and brought it to me without comment, setting the data tablet on my desk with a look that said she understood what it meant. It meant New Carthage had not been the first time. It meant the Veth hegemony had done this before, to other species, to other children, in other colonies and other systems, and had watched those species absorb the blow and go quiet and retreat from the territory they had been pushing into. It had worked before. Other species had decided that the grief was too large, and the cost of response was too high, and the compact framework would handle it eventually, and perhaps it was better to pull back and rebuild. They had expected us to make the same calculation. We did not. I sat in my command chair on day 22 and looked at the tactical map that showed the Veth hegemony's remaining operational capacity, and I thought, this is what it looks like when a species realizes too late that it has fundamentally misread someone. They had studied our diplomacy and concluded that it was our nature. They had not understood that our diplomacy was a choice we made, and that choices can be unmade. They had thought the restraint was permanent. They had not known that underneath it was something older and much less interested in compromise. On day 23, I received a communication request from a Veth military envoy named Commander Rhett Vane, who identified himself as representing the Hegemony High Command. He had reached out through a neutral communication channel, which told me he understood that official compact channels were no longer serving the hegemony's interests. He was polite, he was calm. He opened with an acknowledgement of what had happened on New Carthage, which surprised me slightly. He did not deny it. The hegemony recognizes that the action taken at New Carthage has produced an outcome that was not anticipated, he said. His translator was good. The words came through cleanly. Tell me what outcome was anticipated, I said. He paused, a withdrawal, as has occurred in similar situations in the past. I looked at him through the screen for a moment. Commander Vane, I said. The phrase similar situations in the past is doing a great deal of work in that sentence. I would like you to be more specific. Another pause. Longer this time. He was calculating something. The way a person calculates when they realize the information they were about to share will be used against them, but they have run out of room to avoid sharing it. There have been cases, he said carefully, in which deterrent actions of a similar nature were taken in contested colonial regions. Against which species? I asked. He did not answer. Commander Vane, I said, I am going to tell you something, not as a threat, as information. The Compact Council is at this moment receiving documentation of every incident I believe you are choosing not to name. That documentation is being cross-referenced against Veth military hardware signatures. The analysis is thorough. So I would like to ask you a direct question, and I would like a direct answer, because it will determine the shape of everything that comes next. I leaned slightly forward. How many times have you done this? The silence that followed was long enough that I could hear the background ambient noise of wherever he was transmitting from, a faint mechanical hum, climate control probably. Then he said, I am not authorized to provide that information. Then this conversation is over, I said. I hope whoever authorized this policy is having a thorough discussion about consequences right now. When the hegemony is ready to provide a full accounting, you know how to reach me. I closed the channel. Percy Holt was already looking at me from the tactical station. Waiting, continue, I said. The Veth homeworld had a name that translated roughly as the first warm place. I had read that in a cultural briefing early in my career, years before any of this, when the Veth were simply another species in the Compact's roster, and not a name that produced a specific feeling in my chest. I had found it touching at the time, a species that named their home after warmth, something almost universal about that. I thought about it standing at the forward bridge display. As the Ironhold entered the inner system of the Veth hegemony's core territory and the homeworld appeared on the long-range sensor feed, a blue-gray sphere in the dark, circled by the wreckage of what had been a formidable orbital defense network until 48 hours ago. The fleet arrayed around me was quiet, not the quiet of waiting, the quiet of having arrived. It had taken 31 days to reach this point, 31 days of systematic, patient work that had removed, piece by piece, every mechanism through which the Veth hegemony projected power beyond its home system. Their fleet was not destroyed. It was contained, scattered across several systems without coordination or supply lines, rendered operationally inert. Their government was still physically intact on the surface of the homeworld. Their military command structure was still technically in place. But they were encircled, they had no reach. And they knew it. The communication request came through at 0847 hours. It was flagged as originating from the Imperial Transmission Center on the Veth homeworld, the highest level official channel they had, Emperor Veth Karan. The title translated technically as First Decider, which I had always thought was a more honest name for a head of state than most species used. I accepted the communication. He was not what I had expected, visually. I had seen images of Veth leadership before, the formal ones that circulated through diplomatic briefings, high-resolution photographs designed to project authority. The Emperor on my screen was smaller than those photographs suggested, older. His chitin was a darker shade than standard Veth coloring, and his eyes, 4 of them arranged in a flat horizontal line above his jaw structure, were very still. He held himself with the rigid posture of someone who had been maintaining composure by force for a long time. He spoke in Veth, and my translator worked at a half-second delay. Commander Sahin, I have requested this communication to speak with you directly, as one command authority to another. I am here, I said. I want to begin by acknowledging the situation as it stands, he said. Your fleet has demonstrated a capacity that we did not correctly anticipate. I am not going to pretend otherwise. That would not serve either of us. I agree, I said. What do you want to say? He was quiet for a moment. The 4 eyes did not blink. I want to say that what was done at New Carthage was a decision made within a framework of hegemony strategic doctrine that dates back many generations. I am not excusing it. I am providing context. I understand the context, I said. I would like you to answer a question. You may ask it. You targeted those specific buildings, I said. Not the power grid, not the defensive structures, not the administrative center. The places where children were. That was a specific choice. I want to understand how that choice was made. The Emperor was still for several seconds. The ambient sound of his transmission chamber was a low, steady tone, like distant machinery. The doctrine, he said finally, was developed based on an analysis of what causes species to abandon contested territory. Direct military confrontation was found to be ineffective in the long term. It creates resistance. It creates heroes. It creates the conditions for extended conflict. But the removal of a species' capacity to imagine its own future in a territory, which is concentrated in its young, was found to produce withdrawal without extended conflict. He said it plainly, not easily but plainly, like someone who had decided that the time for evasion was past. I sat with that for a moment. How many colonies, I said. He did not answer immediately. His eyes shifted slightly, which in Veth body language I knew from briefings indicated internal calculation. I would need to review the complete historical record, he said. I have the complete historical record, I said. Faye Drummond stepped into frame beside me and placed a data tablet on the console in front of me. I looked at it for a moment, then back at the Emperor. I am going to read you a list, I said. These are the incidents we have identified and cross-referenced against Veth. Military hardware signatures and deployment records. I want you to listen to everyone. I read the list. It took 11 minutes. I read every colony name. I read every species affected. I read the dates. I read the estimated number of children in each targeted structure at the time of each incident, based on colony population data and building classification records. I did not rush. I did not emphasize. I simply read, in the same tone I would use to read an operational log, because the tone was not the point. The content was the point. When I finished, the transmission chamber on the other end was very quiet. 47 incidents over 61 years, I said. 11 species. New Carthage was not an aberration. It was a policy in regular use, which means the decision made at New Carthage was not made by a rogue commander or a regional authority acting outside its mandate. It was a routine application of approved doctrine. The Emperor did not deny it. Yes, he said. It was a very small word for what it was carrying. I want to tell you what is going to happen now, I said. And I want to be precise, because I think precision matters more than anything else in this conversation. He waited. The Veth hegemony as a governmental and military structure is finished, I said. Not because I am angry, not because humanity wants what you have, because an entity that has made this specific choice repeatedly, across 6 decades, about children, about the future of other species, cannot continue to exist as a functioning power in this galaxy. That is not a punishment. It is a logical conclusion. You are dissolving our civilization, he said. No, I said clearly. I am not. Your people will live. Every Veth civilian on every world in your territory will be protected. We are not doing to your children what you did to ours. I want that on the record. I want every species watching this transmission to hear me say that explicitly, because it is the most important sentence in this entire conversation. Something shifted in the Emperor's stillness. Not quite emotion, not in a form I could name with certainty, but something. Then what are you dissolving, he asked. The structure that made those decisions, I said. Every member of the military and governmental command chain who authorized and maintained the doctrine I just read from the list will be remanded to a compact war crimes tribunal. Every world in the hegemony will be placed under compact receivership, administered by representatives of the species you targeted. The Veth people will have self-governance over their communities and their daily lives. They will not have the capacity to project military force into the territory of other species, not for a long time, perhaps not in my lifetime. He was quiet again. Why are you not doing to us what we did to others, he asked. I had expected many questions. I had not quite expected that one, worded exactly that way. Because we remembered that you have children too, I said. We chose to remember that, even now. We chose that, and it was a choice. And I want your history to record that it was a choice we made deliberately, at the moment when we had the power to make the other one. The Emperor looked at me for a long time through the screen. Your species is very strange, he said finally. Not as an insult, as a statement of genuine bewilderment. Yes, I said. We have been told that before. The formal surrender documentation was transmitted by the hegemony's Imperial Chancery 6 hours later. I sent acknowledgement and passed the documents to the Compact Council representative, who had been waiting in a holding communication channel for 2 days, because I had known this was coming, and I had wanted someone to be ready to receive it properly. Admiral Sarenval of the Therial Collective sent me a personal communication that evening. Not official, not on behalf of the Compact. A personal message. It was short. It said, my aide found the records you mentioned. We are reviewing them now. I expect there will be conversations that were long overdue. I think I understand better now what we were watching. I wrote back. I hope the conversations help. Please pass my regards to your crew. I sat on the bridge alone that night, after my team had rotated off and the ship was in its quiet overnight cycle. Outside the viewport, the Veth homeworld turned slowly in the dark. Its cities were lit from orbit, scattered points of warmth against the surface. And I thought again about the name, the first warm place. There were children down there who would grow up in a different world than their parents had shaped. Children who had not made the choices their leaders had made. Children who would inherit consequences they had not earned. That was the hard part of all of it, and I sat with it, honestly, because I thought it deserved honesty. There was no clean version of what we had done. The hegemony's people would suffer real disruption, real uncertainty, real grief for the shape of the world they had known. Innocent people, mostly, people who had gone about their lives without directing policy. But the alternative had been to do nothing, or to do enough to make a statement and no more. And I had stood on 3 scorched foundations on New Carthage, and I knew with certainty that doing nothing, or doing enough and no more, was simply choosing to let the policy continue until it reached another colony, and another set of foundations, and another small child sitting in the hollow of a wall holding something she refused to let go of. I could not make that choice. I would not. The iron hold held her orbit, and the homeworld turned, and I watched it for a long time before I finally went to get some sleep. The galaxy changed. It does not always change dramatically or all at once. Sometimes it changes the way a person changes after a long experience, quietly, in the structure of how things are understood rather than in the surface appearance of how they look. I am writing this from a house on the coast of Nova Scotia. The retirement paperwork that I withdrew on the morning after New Carthage was eventually, finally, resubmitted. This time it went through without question. I believe the people at UEF Command were quietly relieved to process it. I had become, in the period following Operation Lament, the kind of figure that institutions are never entirely comfortable having on active duty. Too much symbol, too much history. Better in the archive than at a command console. I do not disagree. I am not built for peacetime command. I never was. The Nova Scotia house is small and cold in the mornings, and the water outside my window is a specific shade of gray-green that I find deeply calming. I learned to fish eventually, though I remain mediocre at it. There is a simplicity standing at the edge of the water with a line in your hand and no decisions to make that I have come to value enormously. I have also been writing for several months, which is how this account came to exist. I want to put down, in plain language, what I believe happened in the years after Operation Lament ended. Not the official history, which is available in many places and has been written by many people more formally credentialed than me. The version I know from the inside. The compact restructured its foundational charter within 18 months of the hegemony's dissolution. This had been coming for some time, and I do not want to take credit for it. That belongs to others. Delegates from the 11 species affected by Veth doctrine had been quietly building a case for reform for years. What Operation Lament did was remove the obstacle that had been preventing the case from being heard, which was the simple fact that the Veth hegemony had been too powerful and too useful to too many compact members for anyone to want to challenge it. Once the hegemony was no longer a factor, the conversation happened quickly. The New Carthage Protocols, as they came to be called, established a protected persons framework within compact law that specifically addressed civilian populations during territorial disputes and conflict situations. They went further than existing law in several directions, but the most significant element was a provision that classified deliberate targeting of civilian structures housing children as a crime against all compact member species, subject to collective response rather than bilateral dispute resolution. It was, in essence, a formalization of the position I had taken the morning I sent that first message from New Carthage. Every compact member signed it. No species wanted to be the one to refuse. I am told that in the Compact Council session where the vote was held, the debate was very short. Admiral Sarenval of the Therial Collective became, in the years following, one of the more vocal advocates for the expanded protocols. She made a statement at the signing ceremony that I was sent a transcript of, which I have read several times. She said, in part, that the events surrounding Operation Lament had taught her that restraint and passivity were not the same thing, and that a civilization capable of choosing mercy at the moment of maximum power was demonstrating a form of strength that pure military capacity could not replicate. I thought that was well said. I sent her a message to tell her so. She replied with a brief note that made me laugh, which I did not expect. The Veth people themselves are a more complex story. The world did not end for them. I had promised that, and the promise was kept, which required genuine work from a great many people who were not me, and deserve the credit for it. The transition to compact receivership was difficult. Any significant change in how a society is governed is difficult, particularly when it arrives from outside rather than from within. There was hardship, there was anger, directed at many targets. There was grief, but there were also, in time, other things. A Veth educational reformer named Unwritten, who had been working within the hegemony system for decades trying to shift doctrine from the inside and getting nowhere, became one of the most prominent voices in the restructuring process. She had known about the colonial policy. She had opposed it, quietly, at considerable personal risk. After the dissolution, she spoke publicly about it for the first time, And what she said was difficult for many of her people to hear, and important precisely because of that difficulty. She sent me a message once, through an intermediary. I still have it. It said that she was grateful that the response had been what it was, and not something worse, and that she hoped humanity understood that within her species, as within every species, there had always been those who recognized what was wrong and tried to stop it. She asked that I remember that when I thought about the Veth. I wrote back that I had never stopped knowing it, that it was, in fact, the reason I had drawn the line where I drew it. We exchanged a few more messages over the following years. I consider her, in a limited way that crosses a significant amount of history, something like a colleague. The Therial Collective and several other compact members quietly revised their intelligence assessments of human military capability in the months after Operation Lament. This was not something anyone announced officially. It emerged through changed behavior. Proposals that previously would have been advanced without much consideration for human opinion began, subtly and then less subtly, to involve consultation with human representatives before they were finalized. The small, routine discourtesies that junior compact members often experience from more established ones became, in my observation, somewhat less frequent when humans were involved. I found this less satisfying than I might have expected. The respect that comes from demonstrated capability is a real thing, but it is not the same as the respect that comes from being genuinely understood. What I would have preferred was a galaxy in which New Carthage had never been necessary. That preference is not available, so I hold it lightly and get on with things. I visited Mira twice in the years between Operation Lament's end and my retirement. The first time, she was 12, living with a foster family in Auckland who were good people and treated her well. She had been speaking again for about a year at that point, according to Dr. Price, who had stayed in touch with her welfare through official channels. She was quiet but engaged. She had strong opinions about marine biology, which she was studying with the kind of focused interest that children bring to subjects they have decided to claim entirely as their own. She did not talk about New Carthage directly during my visit. I did not push the subject. We walked along the waterfront, and she told me about bioluminescent organisms in the deep ocean with an earnestness that I found genuinely moving. Before I left, she said, without looking at me, "You did what you said you were going to do, yes?" I said. She nodded once and went back to watching the water. The second visit was when she was 16. She had been accepted into a pre-university program for xenobiology. She was taller than I had expected, with the same short dark hair and a self-possession that was new, or perhaps had always been there and had simply grown into its full shape. She sat across from me at a cafe table with a cup of tea and looked at me with clear, direct eyes and said, "I read the full account of what happened. The operational logs, the council records, all of it." "I know," I said. "You had the right to." "I have a question," she said. "Ask it. Do you regret any of it?" I had known this question was coming. Not the specific words, but the shape of it. I had been thinking about how to answer it honestly for years. "I regret that it was necessary," I said. "I regret that the situation existed that required those decisions. I do not regret making them, and I do not regret that it was me who answered the beacon, and found you, and carried you back to the ship." She thought about that. Her expression was thoughtful rather than satisfied, which told me she was taking it seriously, and not just accepting it because it sounded correct. After a moment, she said, "I think that is an honest answer." "It is the only kind I know how to give," I said. We talked for another hour about her studies and her plans and the particular xenobiology project she was working on, involving atmospheric processing, organisms on a colony world in the outer reach. She was brilliant and precise and a little impatient with anything she found intellectually unrigorous, which made me quietly glad that whatever New Carthage had taken from her, it had not taken that. When we said goodbye outside the cafe, she did not hug me. She extended her hand formally, which I found I respected. I shook it. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thank you for talking with me," I said. She walked away toward her program building, and I stood applaudiment for a moment in the Auckland afternoon. With the wind off the harbor and the sound of the city around me, and I thought that whatever I had built my life around for 11 years of fleet command, the thing I was most satisfied by was not a tactical victory or a political outcome or a line in a history record. It was the fact that she was walking away, that she had somewhere to walk to, that she had a future that was hers to determine. That was what all of it had been for. I retired 3 weeks later. I submitted the paperwork, said goodbye to the Ironhold, which was being reassigned to a new commander who I believed was more than equal to the posting, and flew to Nova Scotia. The house was quiet. The water was cold and gray-green. I stood at the edge of it on my first morning there, and watched the horizon and breathed the clean air and thought about everything and nothing for a while. And then I went inside and made coffee. The galaxy was not safe. It had never been safe, and it would not become safe simply because one particularly stark lesson had been delivered and received. There would be other problems, other decisions, other mornings when someone on a bridge somewhere would read a distress signal and have to decide what kind of person they were going to be. I hoped when those mornings came that people would remember what had happened at New Carthage, not as a threat and not as a template, as a fact about what humanity was capable of, and what humanity had chosen not to do when it was capable of anything. The difference between those two things was, I believed, the most important thing we had ever demonstrated in all our years among the stars. We had been given the opportunity to show the worst of ourselves, and we had chosen to show something better. It had not been easy. It had not been comfortable. It had required sitting in a command chair and signing papers and reading lists aloud and looking at Mira's face in a hospital bed and carrying the weight of 40,000 people through 31 days of something I never want to do again. But we had chosen it, freely and deliberately, and at the moment when no one could have stopped us from choosing otherwise. I drank my coffee and watched the Nova Scotia morning arrive, pale and cold and full of the particular kind of quiet that only exists far from the things that require decisions. Somewhere out in the galaxy, I was fairly certain that at least a few species were at this very moment reconsidering certain plans, adjusting certain policies, having certain conversations that might not have happened otherwise. I thought about what they were deciding. I found for the first time in longer than I could clearly remember that I was not worried about the answer. I finished my coffee and went to get my fishing rod.